Epilogue. The immediate aftermath and the end. The light that spread across Trixie's prone form and forced her awake was cool and seemed to spread gradually, more like fog than actual light. As her eyes fluttered open, she saw the palace ruins around her, lit brilliantly by the full moon's light. Moonlight? Trixie was almost instantly on all four hooves, and almost immediately thereafter had fallen back on her side as her body took the time to remind her that she was exhausted, drained both mentally and magically, and in all ways should not be trying to move as she just did. The blue unicorn took a few deep breaths to steady herself, then climbed onto her hooves at a more measured pace, casting her gaze upward. Greeting her vision was a star-studded night sky, with a moon hanging high overhead. The moon looked different, however. Emblazoned on it was a new pattern that had never been there before, a series of dark patches in the shape of a unicorn's head and horn. Even as Trixie watched, however, the pattern disappeared in a flash. "Huh," Raindrops said. Trixie looked and saw her companions, her friends, beginning to pick themselves up as well. Wonder what that was all— Whoa! Raindrops had to leap backwards as two streaks, one mint green and white and the other pale gray and blonde, whipped past her, nearly bowling her over. As it stood, she was still clipped and sent staggering. Neither Ditsy-Doo nor Lyra seemed to notice as they rushed over to the collapsed foals and older ponies. Trixie's heart fluttered at the sight of so many fallen ponies, and she rushed forward, her remaining friends following. She doubted that the elements could have possibly harmed them, but Corona hadn't seemed particularly cautious with her spellcasting prior to the end. Even as those dark thoughts seeped into her mind, however, they were dispelled, as the merely unconscious foals and mares and stallions began to wake up, completely unharmed. Though for two of them, at least, it looked like it may have been only a temporary thing. Lyra had found Bonbon just as the mare had gotten to her hooves under her, and impacted against her with slightly less speed than an unladen train engine, with its furnace burning hotter than the fires of Tartarus, sending the two tumbling and ending with Lyra pinning Bonbon to the ground, her lips pressed firmly to her love's. Dinky-Doo, meanwhile, once found by her mother, suffered a similar fate, scooped up into the Pegasus mare's forelegs and held tightly against Ditsy's chest, Ditsy showing no sign of ever intending to let her daughter go. Tears were in no short supply, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Is every pony all right?" Cheerilee asked as the rest of Trixie's friends caught up to the group. Cheerilee moved quickly into the mass of foals, most of whom gathered around her familiar face, though several remained with the other adults, the ones lucky enough to have relatives kidnapped by Corona as well. "Is any pony hurt?" As the foals all shook their heads or confirmed that they were all right, though scared, Cheerilee looked to Carrot Top and Raindrops, who were amongst the mares and stallions. "How about them?" "Fine," Raindrops announced as the adults all confirmed that they were all right. "Every pony's okay." Trixie let out a sigh of relief at that, though her elation was short-lived as she forced her sleep-deprived mind— being forced to unconsciousness was not the same thing, as it turned out— to press forward. First, she searched the ground near where she had fallen and found her hat. It was covered in dirt and hoof marks, a little frayed, and still somewhat damp, but Trixie ignored this, as she removed the tiara she still wore— all her friends were, in fact, wearing the jewelry that the elements had manifested as— and put it back on her head. After a moment's consideration, she slipped the tiara on over it, and found to her surprise that the ornament fit rather snugly on the wizard's hat, almost as though it was designed to be there. That important part having been taken care of, Trixie turned her attentions to the next most important matter. "Zecora," she said, trotting forward and looking around. "Spike, where are they?" There was a moment's pause before Raindrops took to the skies, looking around. "I don't see them," she announced after a moment of searching. "Pony feathers," Trixie cursed. "No use searching for them now." She paused as a flash of silver-white light spread across the courtyard. The ponies there all froze, looking in horror towards the flash's source, the ruined tower of the palace, the same place where Corona had fallen, where the beam from the elements had finally overtaken her. It was enough to tear Lyra's eyes away from Bonbons and for Ditsy-Doo to squeeze her daughter even tighter. "No," Carrot Top whispered. No." Trixie swallowed as she looked to the formerly kidnapped mares and stallions, then to the foals, then to her friends. She grit her teeth. "Come on," she insisted, setting off at a gallop. The other 5 followed her quickly, grim determination setting in. Reaching the tower was easy, climbing it only slightly harder. The stairs were steep, but they were also stone and had not worn away over time. The stairs they climbed brought the 6 elements of harmony inside after their climb. They ended up standing in a wide chamber, its roof having long disappeared over time. At its far end was a pedestal, set in front of a shattered stained glass window. Standing just inside the entrance, her back to the elements, was a pony, taller than most stallions, deep blue in coloration, with an animated mane and tail, like flowing water catching the reflection of the star-filled sky, possessed of both wings and a horn, and with a cutie mark of a black patch of night, broken by a white crescent moon. "Luna!" Trixie exclaimed, forgetting formal titles. The princess turned in time to see Trixie rush toward her, though the unicorn skidded to a halt before she could get too close, as memories of her last conversation with the alicorn came rushing back. Her mouth opened and closed a few times before sound came out, and Luna took the time to look at Trixie, then to each of her friends behind her, who had all bowed in respect. "Hello, princess." Luna inclined her head. "Hello, Trixie," she responded after a moment. To the blue unicorn's surprise, Luna seemed just as unsure as Trixie herself was as to where this conversation should be going. After a long bout of silence, Luna looked at the tiara on Trixie's head. "The element of magic," she noted. Trixie nodded. "Yes," she confirmed. "It took me a little bit, but I finally figured out what you meant when you said that the 6th element was right beside me." Luna grinned slightly, though it was forced. "That's good," she decided. Trixie scuffed a hoof, glancing around a moment. "So, how did you know?" Trixie asked. "Know what?" Luna inquired. "Know about them," Trixie responded, waving a hoof to her friends. "How did you know that they'd be beside me 5 years ago? Did you know that Corona was going to escape? Was this some kind of plan or something?" Luna paused, a look of genuine confusion overcoming her features. It was matched, after several seconds, by Trixie's own expression. "Trixie," Luna explained, "I meant your cutie mark." "Ha!" a magenta voice exclaimed. Trixie wasn't certain how a voice could be magenta, but glancing behind her, she saw Cheerilee grinning broadly. The other 5 had risen from their bows, looking relieved that the silver-white flash had apparently just been Luna returning from exile on the moon, and not the signal to start another round with Corona. Trixie turned back to her mentor. "But," she objected, "but my cutie mark isn't beside me, it's on me." "On your side," Luna noted. "But not B-sides! This is just like that always moves but never wanders riddle." Tree," Carrot Top chimed in. She, along with the other ponies, made their way forward, so that they were standing next to Trixie. The blue unicorn glared at Carrot Top. "Trees don't move." "Yes, they do," Ditsy-Do explained. "They blow in the wind." "That doesn't count as moving, and even if it did, it's not always windy, so they don't always move." "Trixie, I heard that riddle when I was 1, maybe?" Raindrops asked. "You're overanalyzing it." "Every pony knows the answer," Lyra added. "I know it too, it's just that it's a stupid answer," Trixie grumbled. Luna looked between the 6 of them, a far more genuine smile on her features at the antics of the ponies before her. "Congratulations," she offered, starting to incline her head, then pausing as she thought better of it. She instead backed away a few paces, and actually bowed to the 6 ponies. The sight was enough to leave them speechless. "You saved Equestria," Luna continued. "All of you, working together. More than that, you have earned the elements of harmony. No, you are the elements now. You restored them from their inert state, a feat even I could not accomplish. And you did this in order to stand against a monster, against the tyrant sun, one of the worst enemies Equestria has ever had." Luna lifted herself up from her bow. Her expression had changed, her smile dropping, and instead a look of melancholy coming over her features as she turned around, looking down the length of the tower's room, as she had on the first entering. "Now, if you will excuse me," Luna said grimly, "there is some pony I must talk to." Celestia was in a considerable amount of pain, but she was alive. She was whole, and she was not trapped once more in her sun. As the alicorn forced her eyes open, finding herself behind a stone pillar, she began laughing, ignoring that it hurt to do so. "Ha ha!" she exclaimed, climbing to her hooves. "Not even the elements can stop the sun." "You are typically the more powerful one," Luna admitted. Celestia's eyes widened and she spun around, ignoring the ache in her body as she lashed out with magic, calling down a solar flare that burned her treacherous sister's body to a crisp. Or that was what was supposed to happen. Instead, only a few golden sparks escaped her horn, and even that took everything Celestia had. She nearly fell to her knees from the effort, but she forced herself to remain standing. Though with her head dropped, pink locks of hair fell down over her eyes. Her fiery mane was gone. Her eyes would no longer be glowing either, she knew, instead having reverted to normal-looking ones with pink irises. And was it just her, or was Luna taller than she used to be? No, the opposite. She was shorter than Luna, the consequence of having so much magic pulled from her at once. She would still be taller than many stallions, but not all. Celestia grit her teeth and flared her wings in challenge. "So, sister," she hissed. "Come to finish what the elements could not? The sun again? I will escape. I will always escape. Though it may take me 1,000 years again, or 10,000 or 100,000. Equestria is still mine. It belongs to me." Luna just looked at her, and a terrible clarity gripped Celestia as she realized what she would do if she were Luna and had just heard Celestia proclaim that. "No!" the white alicorn exclaimed, stumbling backwards, wings beating furiously as she tried to take to the air. They lifted her for a moment, but then their strength gave out, and she fell once more to the ground. Her hooves scrabbled on the stone floor beneath her as she picked herself up and began running towards the exit of the ancient palace, and finding her way blocked by the corrupted elements. "No!" Celestia proclaimed again, backing away, eyes wide. Nearly as wide as their own as the elements took in her changed appearance, her mundane mane and tail, her shrunken form. Looking away, looking once more for somewhere to run, she saw her sister coming out from behind the pillar Celestia had been at moments ago, the same look on her face. Celestia grit her teeth, trying to call upon her magic. Sparks once more flew from her horn, even as she backed away from the steadily advancing Luna. "No, thou cannot!" she exclaimed. "I am the sun! I am thy queen! Thy elder! Thou hast no right to judge me! Equestria is mine! Mine to do with as I please!" "Celestia," Luna tried. "As is every pony in it," Celestia continued, as she tried once more to call on magic. She was certain her mane and tail ignited even for the barest moment, as she continued to back away from Luna. "The ponies are like gnats! They need protection! A strong hoof!" "Celestia!" "Lest chaos reign! They are weak and mortal and do not know the dangers that surround them!" Celestia had backed herself against a stone pillar. She tried to move around it, but Luna was there, in front of her, faster than her considerably weaker senses could follow, wings spread wide, and creating a wall. "Without me," Celestia continued, "the griffins, the dragons, Discord, Tirac, thou were there, Luna! Thou knowest the world as I do! How couldst thou deny me my right? My cause is just! My— Tia!" The name cut through Celestia's tirade and her defenses, like a hot knife through butter. She blinked several times. The word had possessed no magic in and of itself, but how long? How long since her sister had called her that? Longer than a millennium, certainly. She gazed upwards at Luna, who returned the stare evenly. For the first time, Celestia looked at her sister and saw not murderous resolve, not treacherous intent, but sadness, resignation. Celestia lunged with her horn. Luna blinked, and Celestia's entire body was wrapped in a midnight blue aura. Her horn charge stopped before coming anywhere near Luna's throat. "Don't," Luna said, though her voice cracked. She paused, closing her eyes before starting over without opening them. "Please, Tia, don't make me do this again. 1,000 years ago, I thought I'd lost you forever, and it destroyed me. But if this is going to turn into some kind of cycle..." The princess paused once more before opening her eyes and looking Celestia in the face. "We were meant to rule together, sister. No! Celestia shouted. It's mine! All of it! Everything mine! All mine! Luna retreated several steps at the exclamation, eyes wide, as Celestia began struggling against Luna's telekinetic grip. Tia, you're not well. You need help. Let me... Release me! Release me, or next time I will not spare thee! Thou shalt burn! Luna blinked several times more, mouth hanging slightly open as she watched Celestia struggle and cry out in anger. The princess was breathing heavily at the sight and looked like she was on the verge of collapsing and just dying on the spot from sorrow at what her sister had become. After several long moments, however, her eyes narrowed, and she forced her breathing to steady. Corona? She proclaimed, ignoring the alicorn's cries of protest about her name. You leave me no choice. You will once more be banished to the heart of the sun. Escape, if you can, but next time I will be waiting. I will be prepared. Celestia spat at Luna. Thou shalt suffer, she shouted, even as Luna's horn began to glow brighter. You shall all suffer for denying me my right! Luna's horn was glowing bright enough now to transcend its normal blue aura and be glowing white instead. She opened her eyes, similarly gleaming with power, when a green-tinged cloud of particles passed in front of her face. The princess stumbled backwards and out of the cloud, coughing and sputtering at whatever she had inhaled. Her concentration slipped and Celestia fell to the floor out of Luna's magical grip, while Luna's own magic spun wildly out of control, sending off jets of light and power in random directions. Several nearly struck the elements of harmony, but their accessories glowed and created a barrier against the unintentional assault, protecting them. Celestia lifted herself to her hooves, intent on charging forward with her horn once more, when she felt the presence of a pony beside her. Glancing, she saw Zecora, once more wearing her brown cape, and with an unconscious Spike on her back. Quickly, your majesty! Zecora exclaimed, as she reached into her cloak and produced a bottle of liquid that somehow managed to be striped blue and red, and unstopped it. This brew will restore power to you! Celestia didn't need to hear anything else, biting down on the end of the bottle and throwing her head back, swallowing the concoction in one full gulp, ignoring its bitter taste. She felt it work almost immediately, but pathetically. It gave her only a fraction of her total power. Next to her sister, she would still be weak as a foal, and now Luna looked like she was recovering from whatever Zecora had done to her, glaring angrily at the zebra and her sister. Celestia was a very, very old alicorn, however, and however much it felt like a slap to her face, she knew when to fall back, make a tactical withdrawal, and any other euphemism one cared to think of for run away. Her horn glowed, still gold, not the pure white she preferred, and she wrapped herself in teleportation magic. Almost as an afterthought, she included Zecora and by extension Spike in her spell as well. That made it twice that the zebra had forestalled disaster. Celestia would not let a follower like that go to waste. As for Spike, well, one never knew when brute, dumb muscle could be useful, and Spike was just that when Celestia forced him to age prematurely. In a flash of light, Celestia was gone. But she would return. Celebrating would come later. For now, hours later, as the moon left its high position in the sky and began a gradual, measured, and above all else, proper descent towards the horizon, all Ponyville could do was focus on the return of their loved ones. Most of Ponyville, anyway. Trixie nodded her head slightly. It's actually in better condition than I thought it would be, she remarked as she picked her way through her living room, careful not to step on broken glass or splintered wood. The hole raindrops had made in her window remained, of course, but it had been added to a dozen times over by ponies that looked like they had been literally tearing up the floorboards looking for Trixie. Luna moved with somewhat less caution, a scowl on her features as she surveyed the damage, deepening when she saw the storybook mural on the wall that had contained the legend of Celestia's fall and Corona's rise had been largely left untouched. This, Luna said. This is unacceptable. Whatever their imagined issue with you, this house is... She paused, and her gaze centered on a hole in the ceiling of the room. Was property of the crown. Trixie looked to Luna. It's just a house, Trixie remarked. She forced herself to be cheerful. They were angry and scared, and taking that out on wood and plaster is better than taking it out on each other, right? Trixie paused a moment as she thought. Or me. Luna's scowl persisted for several long minutes. Her gaze had drifted back to the mural once more, and she had stepped up to it, looking into the painted eyes of Corona. The walls stared back emotionlessly. "You're right," she admitted with a sigh. Trixie watched Luna closely. Finally, she asked the question that had to be asked. "Are you alright?" "Of course I'm not!" Luna snapped. The unicorn didn't budge at the burst of emotion, nor the glare that followed, albeit only for a few moments before Luna reined herself in, taking in a deep breath and letting it out slowly. "Every history text talks about Corona, and the revolution against her, and my brave and noble sacrifice by sending her into the sun, but every pony seems to have selectively forgotten what happened next. Every pony but me, and I am trying very, very hard to stop myself from having a relapse. I was as bad as Corona." Trixie blinked at that. "I really don't think that's possible," she said. Luna glared at her again. "I was worse," the princess insisted. "Corona was a tyrant. I was absent and utterly useless at affairs of state because I spent the better part of 12 years in a drunken stupor, trying to block out what I had done, what Corona had forced me to do. I would let days pass without raising the sun, and would set it early as the mood struck me, and probably only raised it at all because barley and grapes need sunlight. I would arrange the stars however I wished. I would descend upon a settlement and make the inhabitants wait on my every wish and amuse myself by manipulating their lives and doling out favors and misfortunes as I desired. I did anything to make myself forget, and ponies everywhere suffered for it." Luna snorted as she looked away from Trixie. Trixie considered. For whatever reason, she wasn't actually very surprised by Luna's admission. "Did you hurt any pony?" she asked. "Countless thousands. I mean in a permanent way, an unforgivable way, rather than you just being a big drunk jerk wandering the countryside." Luna stifled a burst of laughter at that. Trixie's statement made Luna sound like she had been a sorority head leading a hazing ritual more than anything. "I have not forgiven myself," Luna stated. "Princess?" The alicorn shook her head. "No, I was capricious and melancholy, not a monster. But I was essentially a little discord. A storm of chaos followed me wherever I went." Trixie had made her way to an overturned bookcase. It had been full of a fairly generic collection of books, mostly the classics like Fullnapt and The History of the Decline and Fall of the Griffin Empire. Trixie had added only a single book to the collection since moving in, and breathed a sigh of relief as she found her copy of Don Ronquenant unharmed. "What snapped you out of it?" "A family of dragons decided that Equestria was weak and ripe for pillaging. I happened to be nearby as they crossed the border and convinced them that they were mistaken. But after that I realized what I'd been doing, that I was letting my pain and suffering become the pain and suffering of others." "But you did realize," Trixie noted. "Corona didn't. She still hasn't. That makes you better. And you're right, every pony seems to have forgotten that bit of history. It must not have been as bad as you make it out to be." That didn't seem to improve Luna's mood. She breathed in deeply and let her breath out slowly. Corona will be weak for a time," Luna said. "She will recover the depth of her magical reserves in just a few days, but the power will take longer, perhaps 5 or 6 months. But she will not be quiet in that time." The alicorn ruffled her wings a few times as she thought, then looked back to Trixie. "We should return to Canterlot." Trixie blinked a few times at that. "We?" she asked. Luna grinned slightly. It was forced, but only because Luna still didn't seem to be much in the mood. The intent behind it was genuine enough. "Trixie, you saved Equestria, saved the lives of some 5 dozen captives Corona had taken. Surely you don't think that I'm still angry with you?" She looked away. I was lying when I said I didn't banish you here. I did. It is an excellent first appointment, in a way, because it is also small and easily forgotten, and has little standing in the Night Court. Sending you here was intended as a punishment." Luna looked back to Trixie. "The Night Court is the strictest meritocracy. You have to climb through its ranks yourself, Trixie, get noticed yourself, collect your own favors and presentation. But there was no need for me to send you here. where you'll essentially be locked out of the night court. I will arrange for a proper appointment elsewhere, a junior advisory position in Manhattan or New Orleans, or a minister to one of the protectorate states like Cavalia or Feridrike. Something where, if you're clever enough, you could actually get noticed. I was actually hoping I could stay, Trixie interrupted. Luna looked surprised at Trixie's desire as the unicorn pressed on. I mean, I made a horrible first impression on every pony. The residency is a bit of a fixer-upper. Ponyville is kind of a wasteland of Equestria. I'm not sure about the mental stability of some of the ponies here. She trailed off as she realized that if she continued listing all the flaws of Ponyville, the two would be there all night. Anyway, my friends are here. I'm close to Canterlot, so I could even attend the night court directly from time to time. And given that I'm your apprentice and I sort of just help save Equestria, I don't think being noticed will be a problem. Luna considered Trixie carefully before nodding. Very well, she said as she turned around to leave. Trixie followed, both of them exiting through the doors of the residency. The front aperture, at least. The door itself Trixie had not been able to find. Out of a sense of tradition, if not necessary, given the numerous other options Ponyville had seen fit to provide Trixie with. Stay at a hotel for now. I will arrange for the residency's repairs. Trixie nodded at that, though a second later she flinched a little. About that, she said. I might have spent my entire stipend when I was trying to, well, spite you. Luna glanced at Trixie incredulously. How? She asked. Weather-for-hire ponies aren't cheap, especially when they're rushed down from Cloudsdale. But they ended up being superfluous. Their contract specifies no refunds. Luna shrugged. I suppose I could float you some bits, she remarked, and her horn glowed. With a pop, a small cloth bag appeared in front of Trixie, who caught it telekinetically. Trixie was puzzled a moment before sighing. It was you. The random pony I stopped on the street and paid 30 bits to find Lyra. She considered as she remembered Luna's trick prior to the official beginning of the longest night. One of you, anyway. Indeed. I will arrange for more money to be sent to you, but that, she pointed a hoof at the bag, is a loan. I expect to be paid back. Trixie blinked. Why? You're the princess! You haven't paid for anything in centuries! Millennia, even! Luna offered a grin, a more honest one than she had been able to produce for some time. Maybe that's because, as the princess, I never get paid. It was a novel experience, and I had plans for those bits. What plans? Luna didn't answer as the two reached the residency's front gate and stepped out into the street. Previously, it had been nighttime for the first time in what Luna had told them was nearly 20 hours of daylight, the longest day in equestrian history, though far shorter than Corona's promised 10 days of uninterrupted sunshine. Every pony had been asleep, or more likely, lying awake, fearing what Corona was doing to their loved ones. Now the entire town was up and active in their homes, the sheer elation of having their foals and loved ones return to them an almost palpable sensation, though that probably wouldn't persist for long as exhaustion set in and every pony got some much-deserved rest. Luna turned to Trixie as they stopped. Now then, Trixie, she said. You have friends here, and that's good. But you've had those in the past too, and managed to drive them away. You must try hard not to do that again. I know, Trixie said, images of her previous friends she'd had in Canterlot drifting by in her mind's eye. Sea Swirl, Amethyst Star, Chocolate Tail. She nodded, looking up at her hat. The element of magic was still there. It was, perhaps, a bit gaudy, and Trixie didn't think she'd make a habit of wearing it all the time, probably just for formal occasions, and whenever she needed to save the world, the latter of which would hopefully be a rare event. Friendship is magic and all that. Luna blinked. Not the phrasing I would have used, she admitted, but completely valid in its own way. But I don't mean you should keep your friends just to keep the elements functioning. That would be a hollow, meaningless thing. More than anything, you should be happy. Trixie nodded. I'll try, she promised, bowing. And I'll see you soon, Princess Luna. The alicorn inclined her head in acknowledgement, then thought better of it and instead came forward and pulled Trixie into a deep embrace. Trixie remained a not particularly touchy-feely pony, and flinched, but after a moment returned the show of affection. Eventually, Luna pulled away, and closed her eyes, horn glowing. In a moment, she had become a nebulous, star-studded mass that rose into the night sky, then shot off. Trixie watched Luna disappear, then looked to the bag of bits she held. A thought occurred to her that hadn't before, but in hindsight, it was one she really should have considered first. "Does Ponyville even have a hotel?" she asked, then paused again. "Would I even be able to check in at this hour? I wonder if Carrot Top has a spare bedroom." The end.